I was sitting on my porch in Scottsdale, Arizona, drinking my morning coffee when a woman I'd never met stormed up my driveway with a clipboard clutched in her manicured fingers like it was a weapon. She had that haircut, the one that screams, "I want to speak to your manager," and her face was already flushed red before she even opened her mouth. "Excuse me, but you owe the Homeowners Association $12,000 in back fees," she announced, not even bothering with a hello or an introduction. I lowered my coffee mug slowly, trying to process what I'd just heard. "I'm sorry, what?" "Don't play dumb with me. You've been living here for 6 months and haven't paid a single HOA fee. That's $2,000 per month, and frankly, your blatant disregard for our community standards is appalling." She thrust a paper toward me, her French-tipped nails catching the Arizona sun. I didn't take the paper. Instead, I set my coffee down on the porch railing and stood up. "And you are?" "I'm Brenda Hutchinson, president of the Desert Bloom HOA. Now, are you going to pay what you owe, or do I need to place a lien on your property?" That's when I started laughing. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of the situation hit me all at once, and I just stood there chuckling while Brenda's face turned from red to purple. "What exactly is so funny?" she demanded, her voice rising to a pitch that probably scared birds out of nearby trees. "Brenda," I said, trying to compose myself, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I don't owe your HOA anything because I'm not part of your HOA. Everyone on Desert Vista Lane is part of the Desert Bloom HOA. It's in the deed restrictions." "Not me," I said simply. "Listen here, Mr. Caldwell, James Caldwell, Mr. Caldwell, I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull, but I have been the president of this HOA for 8 years, and I know every single property in our jurisdiction. Your house at 1247 Desert Vista Lane is absolutely part of our association." I crossed my arms and leaned against the porch post. "Brenda, do you know who owned this property before me? Some investment company, I believe. They never responded to our letters either, which is why your fees are so high. We had to take legal action against them, but they dissolved before we could collect." "That investment company was called Caldwell Properties LLC, I said. "My investment company, and you know what? I didn't respond to your letters because they were addressed to homeowners in your HOA, which I'm not." Brenda's eye twitched. "You can't just decide you're not in the HOA. That's not how this works." "You're right," I agreed. "I can't just decide that. But the person who developed this entire street 40 years ago, my grandfather, he decided it. And when he sold off the lots, he kept this one parcel out of the HOA covenant. This house and the 5 acres it sits on were never part of your association." "That's ridiculous." "I would know if there was an exception." "Would you?" "Because I have the original deed right inside, along with the title history and a legal opinion from 3 different real estate attorneys. Want to see them?" Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "I don't believe you." "Don't believe me then. But you're not getting $12,000 from me, and if you try to file a lien, my lawyers will have it removed in about 48 hours, and then we'll countersue for harassment and slander of title." "How dare you threaten me?" "I'm not threatening you, Brenda. I'm explaining reality. Now, is there anything else I can help you with, or can I get back to enjoying my Saturday morning?" She sputtered for a few more seconds before turning on her heel and marching back down my driveway. I watched her get into her white Lexus SUV and peel out, leaving rubber marks on the street. I should have known that wouldn't be the end of it. 3 days later, I found a notice taped to my front door. It was printed on official-looking letterhead with "Violation Notice" in bold red letters across the top. According to Brenda's document, my lawn was too long, my mailbox was the wrong color, and I had unauthorized decorative elements visible from the street. The total fine listed at the bottom was $5,000, with an additional $1,000 per week if I didn't rectify the violations within 10 days. I took a photo of the notice and texted it to my lawyer, Marcus Chen, who'd been handling my real estate deals for the past 5 years. He called me back within an hour. "James, this is hilarious." "Is it though?" Yes, because she has absolutely no authority over your property. Send her a cease and desist letter. I'll draft one today and email it to you. Send it certified mail. What if she doesn't stop? Then we sue for harassment and get a restraining order. Trust me, once she realizes you're serious and that you actually do own that land free and clear of any HOA covenant, she'll back off. These HOA presidents are used to bullying people who don't know their rights. Marcus sent me the letter that afternoon. It was beautiful in its directness. It stated clearly that my property was not now, nor had it ever been, part of the Desert Bloom HOA, that any further contact from the HOA regarding fees or violations would be considered harassment, and that any attempt to file liens or other encumbrances would result in immediate legal action. I printed it out, signed it, and took it to the post office that evening for certified mail. Then I went home and tried to forget about Brenda Hutchinson. That lasted exactly 4 days. I was in my garage working on restoring a vintage motorcycle when I heard shouting from the street. I put down my wrench and walked to the end of my driveway to find Brenda standing there with 2 other women, both around her age and both wearing identical expressions of righteous indignation. "This is unacceptable," Brenda was yelling at no one in particular. "Look at this eyesore." She was pointing at my fence. I'd had it installed 2 weeks ago, a simple 6-foot privacy fence made of cedar that I'd put up along the front edge of my property because I was tired of people walking their dogs across my lawn. "It's a fence, Brenda," I said calmly. All 3 women spun around to face me. "It's a violation," Brenda shrieked. "No fences are allowed in the front yards of Desert Bloom properties. It's in the covenant." "Good thing I'm not a Desert Bloom property then." One of the other women stepped forward. She had short blonde hair and wore a visor with a tennis club logo. "I'm Patricia Morrison, HOA Vice President. Mr. Caldwell, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Brenda showed me the property records, and your address is clearly listed in our database." "Your database is wrong," I said. "I'm not in your HOA and I never will be. I sent a cease and desist letter that Brenda should have received yesterday. This is harassment." "We're standing on a public street," Patricia said primly. "We have every right to be here." "You do. But you don't have any right to demand I remove my fence or pay your fees or follow your rules. My property, my choice." The third woman, who had been silent until now, spoke up. She had dark hair streaked with gray and glasses on a chain around her neck. "I'm Susan McKenzie, HOA Treasurer, Mr. Caldwell. I've reviewed our records going back 20 years, and there's no exception listed for your property." "Then your records are incomplete. My grandfather, William Caldwell, developed this entire street in 1985. He sold off parcels 2 through 12 to various buyers, and those parcels were all placed under the Desert Bloom HOA covenant. Parcel 1, which is where we're standing right now, was retained by my grandfather and specifically excluded from the covenant. When he died, it passed to my father, and when my father died 2 years ago, it passed to me." Susan pushed her glasses up her nose. "I'd need to see documentation." "I've already shown documentation to my lawyer, and he's confirmed everything I've said." "I'm not showing you anything because you have no authority over me or my property. Now please leave me alone, or I'll call the police and report you for trespassing." "You can't trespass on a public street," Brenda shouted. "No, but you can harass someone, and I've asked you multiple times to leave me alone. I'm done being polite." I turned and walked back to my garage, ignoring whatever Brenda was shrieking at my back. I pulled out my phone and called the non-emergency police line. I explained the situation to the dispatcher, who said she'd send an officer by to document my complaint. The officer showed up about 20 minutes later. By then, Brenda and her friends had left, but I gave him the full story anyway, showed him the cease and desist letter, and explained the property history. He took notes and gave me a case number. "If they come back and bother you again, call us," he said. "Keep documenting everything." I thanked him and went back to my motorcycle, but I had a feeling this was far from over. The next escalation came in the form of a letter from a law firm. It arrived 5 days after my encounter with Brenda and her HOA cronies, and it was a formal demand letter claiming I owed the HOA not $12,000, but $15,000 in fees and fines. The letter threatened legal action if I didn't pay within 14 days. I forwarded it to Marcus immediately. He called me that evening and he didn't sound amused anymore. James, they hired Blackwell and Associates. They're a firm that specializes in HOA collections. They're aggressive, but they're also expensive. The HOA must be really serious about this. Can they actually do anything? Not if your documentation is solid, which it is, but they'll try. They'll probably file a lawsuit hoping you'll settle. These firms work on contingency usually, so the HOA isn't paying them up front. So what do I do? Let me handle it. I'll contact their attorney and explain the situation. I'll send over copies of your deed, the original covenant, and the title history. Once they see the documentation, they'll probably back off. No lawyer wants to pursue a case they know they'll lose. And if they don't back off, then we go to court and we win. And then we countersue for our legal fees and damages. Trust me, James, you're in the right here. I wanted to believe him, but I'd learned long ago that being right doesn't always matter if the other side is willing to fight dirty. Marcus sent a response to Blackwell and Associates the next day. I got a copy of the email. It was thorough, professional, and backed up with 20 pages of documentation. It should have ended things. It didn't. 2 weeks later, I was served with a lawsuit. The Desert Bloom HOA was suing me for unpaid fees, fines, and damages totaling $25,000. The complaint was full of legal language I could barely understand, but the gist was clear. They were claiming my property was part of the HOA and that I was in breach of the covenant. Marcus filed a response within the required time frame. His answer denied all of their claims and included a counterclaim for harassment, abuse of process, and attorney's fees. He also filed a motion for summary judgment, arguing that the case should be dismissed because there was no genuine dispute of material fact. My property wasn't in the HOA, period. The hearing on the motion is scheduled for 6 weeks from now, Marcus told me. In the meantime, do not engage with anyone from the HOA. Don't respond to their letters, don't talk to them if they come to your property, just ignore them completely. Document everything, but don't engage. I agreed, but it was harder than it sounds. Brenda seemed to be everywhere. She drove past my house multiple times a day, always slowing down to glare at my fence. She left more violation notices on my door, each one more absurd than the last. I was apparently in violation for having a truck parked in my driveway, for having solar panels that weren't approved by the architectural committee, and for planting desert landscaping that didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. I photographed every notice and sent them to Marcus. I didn't respond to any of them. Then Brenda started calling the city. I found this out when a code enforcement officer showed up at my door with a clipboard. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm Officer Ramirez with the City of Scottsdale Code Enforcement. We received a complaint about unpermitted construction on your property." I sighed. "Let me guess, someone complained about my fence and your solar panels and some work you allegedly did in your garage. The fence is permitted. Want to see the permit?" I went inside and grabbed the file from my office. I'd pulled permits for everything, specifically because I knew Brenda might try something like this. Officer Ramirez reviewed the documents and nodded. "Everything looks in order. The solar panels," I showed him those permits too. "And the one for the electrical work I'd done in the garage to install a new subpanel. Sir, you're definitely more organized than most people I deal with," he said with a slight smile. "I'll close this complaint as unfounded. For what it's worth, you might want to file a complaint with the city about false reports. If someone is repeatedly calling in fake violations, that's a misuse of city resources. Can you tell me who filed the complaints?" "I can't officially, but let's just say it was someone with the initials BH who listed herself as president of your HOA. I thanked Officer Ramirez and filed a formal complaint with the city that afternoon. I was done playing nice. The hearing for Marcus's motion for summary judgment was held on a Wednesday morning in early April. The courthouse in downtown Phoenix was busy, full of lawyers and clients rushing between courtrooms. Marcus and I arrived early and found seats on a bench outside the assigned courtroom. "Remember," Marcus said, "let me do all the talking. If the judge asks you a direct question, answer it clearly and briefly. Don't volunteer extra information." I nodded. I'd worn a suit for the occasion, and I felt uncomfortable and overdressed in the Arizona heat. At 9:30, a bailiff called our case. We entered the courtroom, and I saw Brenda sitting at the plaintiff's table with two lawyers from Blackwell and Associates. She looked smug, like she'd already won. The judge was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes. She reviewed the files in front of her for a few moments before looking up. "This is a motion for summary judgment filed by the defendant, James Caldwell. Counsel for the defendant, proceed." Marcus stood and launched into his argument. He was calm, clear, and methodical. He explained the property history, showed the original deed and covenant, and demonstrated that my parcel had never been included in the HOA. He cited case law and statutes. It was impressive to watch. When he finished, the judge turned to the HOA's lawyers. Response. The lead attorney, a man in his 40s with slicked-back hair, stood up. "Your Honor, we dispute the defendant's interpretation of the historical documents. While it's true that the original covenant doesn't explicitly list Parcel 1, our position is that the subsequent development of the street and the clear intent of the developer to create a unified community means that all properties should be included." "Do you have any documentation to support that position?" the judge asked. "We have testimony from longtime residents who believed all properties were part of the HOA. Belief isn't evidence, counsel." "Do you have any deeds, contracts, or recorded documents that contradict the defendant's evidence?" The lawyer hesitated. "Not at this time, Your Honor, but we believe discovery would reveal, counsel. The defendant has provided clear, recorded documentation showing his property was never part of the HOA covenant. You're asking me to allow you to proceed with a lawsuit based on speculation and belief. That's not sufficient to create a genuine dispute of material fact. The motion for summary judgment is granted. The plaintiff's complaint is dismissed with prejudice." Brenda shot to her feet. "Your Honor, this isn't fair. He's been violating our rules for months." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, you need to sit down and be quiet, or I'll have you removed from my courtroom." One of the HOA lawyers grabbed Brenda's arm and pulled her back into her seat, but she was still sputtering. The judge continued. "Furthermore, I'm inclined to grant the defendant's counterclaim for attorney's fees. The plaintiff pursued this action despite clear evidence that they had no basis for their claims. That's exactly the kind of abusive litigation that fee-shifting provisions are designed to discourage. Counsel for the defendant submit a motion for fees within 30 days. Marcus nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor. We left the courtroom victorious. Brenda didn't look at us as we passed. Outside, Marcus shook my hand. That went as well as I could have hoped." The judge clearly saw through their nonsense. "I'll file the motion for fees and we should be able to recover most of your costs." "What happens now?" I asked. Now they leave you alone. The case is dismissed with prejudice, which means they can't refile it. And once we get the fee award, they'll owe you money. Most HOAs will back off at that point because they don't want to keep bleeding funds on a lost cause." I wanted to believe him, and for about 2 weeks it seemed like he was right. Then my fence was vandalized. I woke up one morning to find that someone had spray-painted "HOA rules apply" across 3 sections of my cedar fence in bright red letters. They'd also dumped a bag of garbage on my front lawn and knocked over my mailbox. I called the police immediately. The same officer who'd responded to my first complaint came out and took a report. He photographed everything and collected the garbage as evidence. "Do you have security cameras?" he asked. "Not yet," I admitted, "but I'm getting them installed today." "Good idea. This looks personal. You mentioned an HOA dispute. I filled him in on everything that had happened, including the lawsuit and the recent court victory. He whistled low. Sounds like someone's pretty upset about losing. I'll include all of this in my report. If it happens again, we'll start looking harder at potential suspects. I spent that afternoon installing a comprehensive security camera system. 4 cameras covering every angle of my property, all recording to a network storage device with cloud backup. If someone came back, I'd have them on video. They came back that night. At 2:15 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the new camera system. I pulled up the app and watched in real time as 2 figures approached my fence with spray paint cans. I called 911 while I pulled on clothes. Someone is actively vandalizing my property right now. I have them on camera. The dispatcher kept me on the line while I described what I was seeing. The figures were both wearing dark hoodies, and they were taking their time, spray painting more messages on my fence. I couldn't make out their faces, but one of them moved like an older woman. Sir, officers are 2 minutes away. Please stay inside your home. I stayed inside, but I watched through the app as the vandals finished their work and walked back toward the street. They got into a car parked a few houses down. The camera caught a partial license plate before they drove away. The police arrived quickly. I showed them the video footage and they took a copy of the files. One of the officers recognized the car. That's a white Lexus SUV. You said the HOA president drives one of those? Yeah, Brenda Hutchinson. The officers exchanged glances. We'll follow up on this. Can you email us the complete video files? I sent the files that night. The next morning, Marcus called me furious. James, did someone vandalize your property again? Yeah, last night. How did you know? Because I just got a very angry call from the HOA's lawyer saying that you vandalized your own fence to frame their client, and they're considering filing a complaint against you. I laughed, which probably wasn't the right response. Marcus, I have them on video. It's Brenda and someone else. The police have the footage. Send it to me too. I forwarded the files and Marcus went quiet for a few minutes as he watched them. When he came back on the line, his voice was cold. That's definitely vandalism, and if that's Brenda, which it looks like it is, she's committed a crime. This changes things. What do you mean? I mean, we're not just dealing with a civil dispute anymore. She's criminally harassing you. The police need to arrest her. 2 days later, they did. I was working in my garage when I heard sirens. I looked out to see 2 police cars pulled up in front of Brenda's house, which was about 6 houses down from mine. I walked to the end of my driveway and watched as officers knocked on her door. Several neighbors came out to watch too. This was the most excitement Desert Vista Lane had seen in months. Brenda answered the door, and I could hear her voice carrying down the street, shrill and indignant. The officers spoke to her calmly, and after a few minutes, one of them turned her around and put handcuffs on her. She screamed. Literally screamed. This is illegal. I'm the HOA president. You can't arrest me. Ma'am, you're being arrested for criminal damage and harassment, one of the officers said, his voice level. You have the right to remain silent. They led her to one of the patrol cars while she continued to scream about her rights and about me. I heard my name several times, along with some creative profanity. One of my neighbors, an older man named Carl who lived 2 houses down, walked over to me. What's going on, James? Brenda's been harassing me for months because she thinks I'm part of the HOA. I'm not. She vandalized my property and I caught her on camera, Carl whistled. I always thought she was a bit much with the HOA stuff. She fined me $500 last year because my grass was a 1/4 inch too long. Did you pay it? Yeah, didn't know I had a choice. You might want to look into that. If she's been abusing her authority with me, she's probably been doing it to others. Carl nodded thoughtfully and headed back to his house. I watched the police cars drive away with Brenda in the back of one, and I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. I hadn't wanted things to escalate this far, but Brenda had made her choices. Marcus called me an hour later. I heard they arrested her. News travels fast. The HOA's lawyer called me. They want to settle the fee dispute. They're offering to pay your attorney's fees in full and issue a formal apology acknowledging that your property isn't part of the HOA. What about Brenda? That's a criminal matter now. The HOA can't do anything about that. But between you and me, I think she's going to be removed as president. The board is probably panicking right now. Good. I just want to be left alone. You will be. I'll draft a settlement agreement and send it over for your review. The settlement was finalized 2 weeks later. The Desert Bloom HOA paid my attorney's fees, which totaled almost $18,000 thanks to all of Brenda's nonsense. They also recorded a formal document with the county stating that my property was not now, nor had it ever been, part of their association. And they sent me a letter of apology signed by all the board members except Brenda, who had resigned her position. Brenda's criminal case took longer to resolve. She was charged with criminal damage, harassment, and filing false police reports. She pleaded not guilty initially, but when the prosecutor showed her the video footage, she changed her plea to guilty as part of a deal. She was sentenced to 6 months probation, ordered to pay restitution for the damage to my fence, and required to complete anger management classes. She was also prohibited from contacting me for 2 years under the terms of a restraining order. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. But then I found out about something that changed everything. It started when Carl came by my house one evening with a folder full of papers. "James, you got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" He sat down on my porch and opened the folder. "After you mentioned Brenda might have been abusing her authority, I started looking into the HOA finances. I'm an accountant retired, so I know how to read financial statements. I requested copies of the HOA's records, which members are legally allowed to do, and I found something interesting." He handed me a spreadsheet. I looked at it, but numbers have never been my strong suit. What am I looking at? The HOA collected about $200,000 in fees last year from the 83 homes in the association. That's reasonable. But look at the expenses. They paid almost $90,000 to various vendors for landscaping, pool maintenance, and community services. Okay, I called some of those vendors. Half of them don't exist. The checks were deposited into accounts controlled by Brenda. I stared at him. She was embezzling. Looks like it, and it goes back at least 5 years based on what I can see. We're probably talking about $250,000 or more. Carl, you need to take this to the police. I know, I'm going tomorrow, but I wanted to tell you first because, well, you started this whole thing. If you hadn't stood up to her, we never would have known. Carl filed a police report the next day. The police opened an investigation and they brought in forensic accountants to review the HOA's finances. What they found was worse than Carl had suspected. Brenda had been embezzling from the HOA for almost 8 years. She'd created fake vendor accounts, submitted false invoices, and paid herself for services that were never performed. The total amount was over $400,000. She was arrested again, this time on much more serious charges: wire fraud, theft, forgery, and a string of other felonies. Her bail was set at $50,000 and she couldn't make it. She sat in jail for 3 weeks before her family scraped together enough for a bail bondsman. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and hired a lawyer to pursue civil action against Brenda to recover the stolen funds. But most of the money was gone. She'd spent it on vacations, clothes, home renovations, and the Lexus she'd been driving. She'd been living way beyond her means for years, and the HOA fees had been funding her lifestyle. The criminal case went to trial 6 months later. I was called as a witness, not because I knew anything about the embezzlement, but because the prosecutor wanted to establish Brenda's pattern of behavior. I testified about her harassment, the vandalism, and her refusal to accept that my property wasn't part of the HOA. The prosecutor used my testimony to paint a picture of someone who believed she was above the rules, someone who thought her position as HOA president gave her unlimited power. Combined with the financial evidence, it was damning. The jury convicted her on all counts. She was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution, though everyone knew she'd never be able to pay back that much money. I watched the sentencing from the gallery. Brenda cried and apologized, saying she'd made mistakes and gotten in over her head. The judge wasn't sympathetic. "Miss Hutchinson, you held a position of trust in your community. Your neighbors elected you to manage their association and their money. Instead, you stole from them for years. You used that stolen money to fund a lavish lifestyle while people in your community struggled to pay the fees you kept raising. And when someone challenged your authority, you didn't just argue with them, you vandalized their property and tried to ruin them with false legal claims. This wasn't a mistake. This was a calculated pattern of criminal behavior. 5 years in federal prison is appropriate." Brenda was led away in handcuffs, and I left the courthouse feeling strange. I hadn't set out to destroy anyone's life. I just wanted to be left alone on my own property. After the trial, things finally settled down. The HOA elected a new board, implemented financial controls, and hired a professional management company to handle their day-to-day operations. They sent me a fruit basket and another apology letter, which I thought was a bit much, but I appreciated the gesture. Carl became something of a local hero for uncovering the embezzlement. He was elected to the new HOA board and helped rebuild trust in the organization. My fence remained undamaged, though I kept the security cameras running. Better safe than sorry. One evening about a year after everything started, I was sitting on my porch with a beer, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of orange and purple. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Mr. Caldwell. This is Patricia Morrison. We spoke last year during your dispute with the HOA. I remembered her. She'd been the vice president, one of the women standing with Brenda on the street. What can I do for you, Patricia?" I wanted to apologize. Properly, I mean, not just a letter. I believed Brenda when she said your property was part of the association. I should have looked into it myself before confronting you, and I'm sorry for everything that happened after. Did you know about the embezzlement? No. None of us did. We trusted her completely, that's on us. We should have been paying attention to the finances, but we just let her handle everything. We failed our community. You're still on the board. No, I resigned. Susan did too. We felt like we'd let everyone down. But I wanted to call you because your case made me realize something. Brenda didn't just steal money. She stole the whole idea of what an HOA is supposed to be. It's supposed to be neighbors working together to maintain property values and community standards. It's not supposed to be a dictatorship. You were right to fight back, and I'm glad you did. Thanks, Patricia, I appreciate that. She hung up, and I sat there thinking about what she'd said. She was right in a way. HOAs aren't inherently bad, they're just tools. And like any tool, they can be used properly or they can be abused. Brenda had turned hers into a weapon. A few weeks later, I got an interesting phone call from a real estate developer based in Phoenix. His name was Robert Mendez, and he had a proposition for me. Mr. Caldwell, I understand you own a significant piece of property on Desert Vista Lane in Scottsdale. That's right, 5 acres. I've been looking at development opportunities in that area, and I noticed something interesting about your land. According to the plat map, your property doesn't just include your house and the land it sits on. It includes the actual street, Desert Vista Lane. Is that correct? I pulled out my deed and looked at it carefully. I'd never paid that much attention to the exact boundaries, but Robert was right. The property description included the roadway itself. I never really thought about that. Most people wouldn't. It's unusual for a private party to own a street, but in this case your grandfather developed the land and built the road, and he never deeded it over to the city. He kept it as part of his retained parcel. Okay, what does that mean? It means you own the street, not just your lot, the actual asphalt that all your neighbors drive on to get to their houses. I sat down. Are you serious? Completely. I had a title company verify it. Desert Vista Lane is a private road and you're the owner. The city has an easement for utilities and emergency access, but the actual property is yours. My mind was racing. Why are you telling me this? Because I want to buy your entire property. The house, the land, and the street. I'll pay you fair market value plus a premium for the development rights. I'm thinking $2.5 million. I almost dropped the phone. $2.5 million. That's my opening offer. It's a unique property and it's worth it to me. But I understand if you need time to think about it. I needed more than time. I needed to understand what I actually owned. After I got off the phone with Robert, I called Marcus. Marcus, did you know I own the actual street? What street? Desert Vista Lane. The road. The developer's easement included the roadway and it was never transferred to the city. It's mine. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Hold on, let me pull up the deed. I heard typing, then more silence. James, you're right. The legal description includes the roadway. I can't believe I didn't catch that before. What does this mean? Can I actually control who uses it? Technically, yes. But there are probably implied easements for the other property owners since they need the road to access their homes. You couldn't just block it off without cause. But you do own the underlying land, which means if anyone wanted to do work on the road or change it in any way, they'd need your permission. Someone offered to buy it. $2.5 million, Marcus whistled. That's a serious offer. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I like it here. I like my house, I like my shop, and I finally got the HOA to leave me alone. I don't really want to move. Then don't. You don't have to sell just because someone made an offer. But $2.5 million, Marcus. It's your decision, James, but if it were me, I'd at least hear him out. Maybe there's a deal that works for both of you. I called Robert back the next day and invited him to my house to talk. He showed up in a Tesla wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather portfolio. We sat on my porch and he laid out his vision. He wanted to buy the properties at the end of Desert Vista Lane, the ones that backed up to empty desert, and develop a small luxury subdivision. But he needed access, and he needed to ensure the road could handle construction traffic. I can negotiate with the homeowners at the end of the street, Robert said. But if you own the road, you're the key to the whole project. Without your cooperation, I can't do it. So why offer to buy my property? Because it's the simplest solution. I buy your land, which gives me control of the road and I can proceed with development, but I'm open to other arrangements if you don't want to sell. Like what? Like selling me just the roadway or granting me a permanent easement for development and maintenance. We'd have to work out the details, but there's definitely a deal to be made here if you're interested. I thought about it for a few days. I talked to Marcus, I talked to Carl, and I even talked to my sister in Colorado, who told me I'd be an idiot to turn down that much money. But in the end, I decided I didn't want to sell. I liked my life in Scottsdale. I liked my house and my shop and my quiet street. And after everything I'd been through with Brenda and the HOA, I wasn't ready to give it all up. I called Robert and told him I wasn't interested in selling, but I was willing to grant him an easement for access and utilities if his development project moved forward. We negotiated a price, and I sold him a permanent easement for $150,000. It was enough money to make a difference, but I got to keep my property and my home. Robert's development project took almost 2 years to complete. During that time, Desert Vista Lane saw a lot of construction traffic, but Robert kept his promise to maintain the road and minimize disruption to the existing residents. The new subdivision, called Desert Vista Heights, was beautiful. 8 custom homes on large lots, each one designed to blend with the landscape. The new homeowners were friendly and respectful, and none of them tried to force me to join their HOA. Yes, they formed their own HOA. I found this out when one of them, a woman named Jennifer who'd moved from California, stopped by to introduce herself. "We're forming a homeowners association for the new development," she said. "We wanted to let you know you're welcome to join if you're interested, but we understand your property has its own history with HOAs." I laughed. That's an understatement, but thanks for the offer. I think I'll pass. Totally understand. But hey, if you ever need anything or have concerns about our development, please let us know. We want to be good neighbors. I appreciate that, and they were good neighbors. The whole experience had come full circle in a strange way. An HOA president had tried to force me into something I'd never agreed to, and it had cost her everything. But in the end, a different group of people formed an HOA voluntarily, and they respected my choice to stay out of it. That's how it should work. I still live on Desert Vista Lane in Scottsdale. My fence is still standing, with fresh cedar stain covering the spots where Brenda's spray paint had been. My security cameras are still running, though they mostly just capture footage of roadrunners and the occasional coyote. The Desert Bloom HOA still exists, though it's much better managed now. Carl keeps an eye on the finances, and they've actually started doing some nice improvements to the community pool and common areas. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Brenda got out of prison after serving 3 years of her 5-year sentence. She moved to Nevada to live with her sister. I doubt she'll ever come back to Arizona. Sometimes I think about that first morning when she stormed up my driveway demanding $12,000. If she'd just listened when I explained the situation, if she'd been willing to verify the property records instead of assuming she was right, none of this would have happened. She'd still be HOA president, still living in her nice house, still living her life. But she chose to escalate. She chose to harass me, to vandalize my property, to file a frivolous lawsuit. And somewhere along the way, her other crimes caught up with her. I didn't destroy Brenda Hutchinson's life. She did that herself. I just refused to be bullied on my own property. One Saturday morning, about 3 years after everything started, I was sitting on my porch with coffee, same as I'd been that first day when Brenda appeared. The Arizona sun was rising over the desert, painting everything gold and pink. Carl walked by with his dog, a golden retriever named Max. He waved and headed up my driveway. "Morning, James. You got a minute, always. What's up?" The HOA is planning a neighborhood barbecue next month. 4th of July. We wanted to invite you even though you're not technically a member. That's nice of you, Carl. I'll think about it. You should come. Bring some of that famous potato salad you made for the block party last year. You remember that, of course. Best potato salad I've ever had. Anyway, just wanted to extend the invitation. No pressure. He headed off with Max, and I sat there thinking. A few years ago, I'd been at war with my neighbors over something that shouldn't have been an issue in the first place. Now I was being invited to their parties. Things have a way of working out. I finished my coffee and went inside to start my day. I had a motorcycle in the garage that needed a new carburetor, and the Arizona heat would only get worse as the day went on. Better to get the work done early. As I walked through my house, past the framed deed hanging on my office wall, past the legal documents that proved what I'd known all along, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because I'd won some battle, but because I'd stood up for what was right. My property was mine. It always had been, and it always would be. And no HOA Karen with a clipboard and an attitude could change that. I smiled and grabbed my tools. Time to get to work. The rest of the day passed peacefully, the way most of my days do now. I worked on the motorcycle for a few hours, then cleaned up and drove into Phoenix to meet Marcus for lunch. We'd become genuine friends over the course of the legal battle, and we tried to get together once a month or so over burgers and beer. Marcus told me about his latest case. Another HOA dispute, though nothing as dramatic as mine had been. Most of these cases settle quietly, he said. Yours was unusual because Brenda just wouldn't let it go. She kept escalating when any reasonable person would have backed down. Do you think she really believed she was in the right? I asked. At first, maybe. But after I sent her all that documentation after the court ruled against her, she had to know. I think at that point it became personal for her. She couldn't stand that someone had challenged her authority and won. Pride goes before a fall, exactly. And in her case, it was a pretty spectacular fall. We finished lunch and said goodbye. I drove home through the Phoenix suburbs, past shopping centers and housing developments, past other neighborhoods with their own HOAs and their own rules. I'd never been so grateful for my grandfather's foresight. When he'd developed Desert Vista Lane 40 years ago, he'd kept his own lot separate for a reason. Maybe he'd known that someday someone would be grateful for that independence. When I got home, there was a package on my porch. I picked it up and checked the label. It was from my sister in Colorado. Inside was a T-shirt. It was black with white letters that said, "I own my street, what do you own?" I laughed out loud. My sister had a weird sense of humor, but I appreciated it. I folded the shirt and took it inside. That evening, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. I hadn't done that in a while, and it was a nice evening. The temperature had dropped to a reasonable 85 degrees, and there was a breeze coming across the desert. I walked down Desert Vista Lane, my street, looking at the houses. Most of them were well-maintained, with neat yards and fresh paint. The HOA fees were being put to good use now that they were properly managed. I nodded to neighbors as I passed. Some waved back. A few stopped to chat briefly. Everyone was friendly, and no one mentioned the old disputes. At the end of the street, where Robert's development started, I could see the new houses rising against the desert backdrop. They were beautiful, genuinely beautiful, and they fit the landscape in a way that showed thoughtful design. I stood there for a moment, looking at what had become of my grandfather's vision. He'd built this street, created this community, and kept one piece of it for himself. Now that piece was mine, and I'd fought to protect it. I turned and walked back toward my house, feeling content. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pavement. My pavement, technically, though I tried not to think about it that way, it was everyone's street, really. I just happened to be the one who owned it. Back at my house, I grabbed another beer from the fridge and returned to my porch. This was my favorite time of day, when the heat broke and the desert came alive with the sounds of evening. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Carl. "HOA board meeting next week. Want to come? You're always welcome as a guest." I thought about it for a moment, then typed back, "Thanks, but I'm good. Let me know if anything interesting happens." 3 dots appeared, then his response. "Will do. Enjoy your evening." I set the phone down and sipped my beer. The sky was turning purple now, that particular shade of purple that only happens in the desert. Stars were starting to appear. I thought about everything that had happened over the past 3 years. The confrontations, the legal battles, the vandalism, the arrests, the trial. It had been exhausting and stressful, but I'd come through it intact. More than intact, actually. I'd come through it stronger and more confident. I'd learned that standing up for yourself matters. That property rights matter. That documentation matters. That sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it would be easier to just go along with things. But I'd also learned that most people are reasonable. That most neighbors are friendly. That most HOAs are probably fine as long as they're managed properly and don't have someone like Brenda at the helm. The experience hadn't made me bitter or cynical. If anything, it had made me more appreciative of what I had. As the stars filled the sky and the desert cooled around me, I raised my beer in a silent toast. To my grandfather for having the wisdom to keep this lot separate. To Marcus for fighting the good fight. To Carl for uncovering the truth. And even to Brenda, in a weird way, for teaching me that some battles are worth fighting. I finished my beer and went inside. Tomorrow was Sunday, and I was planning to sleep in, maybe do some work around the house, maybe do nothing at all. The beauty of owning your own property, free and clear of any HOA, is that you can do whatever you want within reason, of course. I'm not a monster. I brushed my teeth, set my alarm, and climbed into bed. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about Carl's invitation to the 4th of July barbecue. Maybe I would go. Maybe I'd bring that potato salad. Maybe it would be nice to celebrate with my neighbors, HOA or not. After all, we were all just people trying to live our lives in this little corner of Arizona. And despite everything that had happened, despite all the drama and conflict, we'd found a way to coexist. That seemed like something worth celebrating. The next few weeks passed in a peaceful blur. I worked on my projects, hung out with friends, and generally enjoyed the summer. The Arizona heat was brutal, but I'd learned to adapt. Early mornings and late evenings outside, midday in the air-conditioned garage or house. The 4th of July barbecue approached, and I decided I would go. I made my potato salad, the recipe my mom had taught me years ago, with red potatoes and a tangy mustard dressing. The barbecue was held at the community pool, which was looking better than it had in years thanks to the HOA's renovations. There were probably 50 people there, adults and kids, all enjoying the holiday. Carl spotted me when I arrived and waved me over. "James, you made it. Told you I'd think about it. And you brought the potato salad. Here, let me take that to the food table." I handed over the bowl and looked around. I recognized most of the faces, though I didn't know everyone's names. A few people came over to say hello, and I found myself having genuinely pleasant conversations. No one mentioned the lawsuit. No one mentioned Brenda. No one mentioned the HOA fees I'd never paid and never would pay. We were just neighbors at a barbecue. Later in the evening, after the food was gone and the fireworks were about to start, Carl pulled me aside. "Hey, I wanted to tell you something. The HOA board took a vote last week. We're going to officially recognize your property as separate from the association in all our documents and communications. No more ambiguity, no more confusion. We don't want a repeat of what happened with Brenda." "I appreciate that, Carl, really. It's the least we can do." "You were right, she was wrong, and we should have figured that out a lot sooner. Anyway, I just wanted you to know you're always welcome at our events, and if you ever change your mind about joining, the door's open." "Thanks, but I'm happy with things the way they are," figured as much. He grinned and headed back to his wife. The fireworks started a few minutes later. I stood with my neighbors, watching the explosions of color in the dark desert sky, and felt genuinely happy. This was what community was supposed to be. Not rules and fines and power trips. Just people coming together because they chose to, because they wanted to, because it made life better. I drove home that night with an empty potato salad bowl and a full heart. My house looked beautiful in the moonlight, the fence standing strong, the desert landscaping casting interesting shadows. I parked in my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at what I'd fought so hard to protect. It was just a house, just a piece of land, but it was mine and that mattered. I got out of the truck and walked to my front door. As I put the key in the lock, I noticed something on the doormat. An envelope. My heart sank. Not again. But when I picked it up, I saw it was just a thank you card. I opened it. "James, thank you for coming to the barbecue and for the amazing potato salad. We're lucky to have you as a neighbor, HOA or not. Happy 4th of July, the Desert Bloom community." It was signed by what looked like 20 different people. I smiled and took the card inside. I put it on my fridge with a magnet, next to photos of my family and a postcard from my sister's last trip to the mountains. Then I grabbed a beer, went out to my porch, and sat down in my usual spot. The fireworks were still going off somewhere in the distance, occasional bursts of light and sound. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "How was the barbecue?" "Good, really good, actually. Glad to hear it. You deserve some peace and quiet after everything." "Thanks for everything you did, Marcus, I mean it. That's what lawyers are for. Well, good lawyers anyway. Enjoy your evening." I set the phone down and looked out at the street, my street, quiet and peaceful in the summer night. Somewhere in Nevada, Brenda was probably thinking about all the choices that had led her to prison. Somewhere in the neighborhood, Carl and the other HOA board members were probably cleaning up from the barbecue. Somewhere in Phoenix, Marcus was probably working on another case. And I was here, on my porch, on my property, living my life exactly the way I wanted to. It had been a long journey from that first morning when Brenda had stormed up my driveway with her clipboard and her demands. But I'd stood my ground, fought my battles, and come out the other side intact. She'd sworn I'd pay. She'd been absolutely certain that she could force me to comply, that she could bend me to her will through threats and lawsuits and harassment, but she'd been wrong. I'd never joined her HOA and I never would, and in the end, she was the one who paid, not me. I raised my beer in a solitary toast to that truth, then leaned back in my chair and watched the last of the fireworks fade from the sky. Life was good. My property was mine, and no HOA Karen would ever change that. The end.